into his arms, laid hands on them, and blessed them. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We define our mission at St. Gregory's as transforming hearts and community through Jesus' love. And I find it an urgent and a compelling message. And all of what we do at St. Gregory's revolves around this call to transform hearts and community through Jesus' love. But I'm very aware that transformation isn't easy. Transformation requires that familiar patterns and familiar ways of thinking and acting need to be shifted and changed. And those shifts are hard. It's hard to think and act in new and different ways. So it's plain hard to undergo transformation. Now, Jesus in today's gospel is transforming attitudes about marriage and divorce. He's speaking about a transformation from marriage being a transactional. We're married for a time. I'm tired of being married. Let me write out a certificate of divorce, and that's that. From a transactional approach to one that truly starts reflecting God's faithfulness, God's mutual care and vulnerability, God's self-giving love. And so Jesus was calling us and his people to a new transformed way of thinking about marriage and commitment. But that's actually not the sermon I'm going to preach today. I'll save that for another day because it's a good one. I want to talk about transformation of another aspect of our life, and one that is very resistant to transformation. And that's our attitude about our financial resources, our money. Next week, we officially kick off our Stewardship campaign as a congregation, and I'm going to be in Haiti. So I thought today I'd say a few words about the transformation of our attitude about our financial resources and the call to live generously. And I want to do that today by starting, as Jesus often did, with a parable. Call it Father Andrew's parable called the outrageously generous investor. So in this parable, there is an outrageously generous investor. And he approaches a friend with an offer for partnership. And the partnership says, I want to go into life and business with you. And his friend, of course, does the kind of vetting that anyone would do before entering into a partnership, and finds out that everyone speaks of this generous investor as amazingly faithful and trustworthy. You can count on this investor to do what he says he or she's going to do. He does further research and finds out that he's one of these 24/7, 365, all-in kind of people, hardworking and faithful. And even when those he's been in partnership with get distracted by whatever happens in life or unfocused on the partnership, the investor remains focused and faithful on the partnership. He finds out that not only is he an all-in terms of his work, he's all in that he's literally willing to risk his life for the partnership. He's willing to lay down his own life to make sure this partnership is going to work. He finds out that this generous investor also has this capacity to continue even eternally, to stay renewed and refreshed and energized in his tireless and loving faithfulness. And finally, he learns the terms of the partnership. And the terms are that in this partnership, the generous investor only wants 10% that he was willing to then take and reinvest in other partnerships. And we get to keep 90%. Now, if you were offered, Father Andrew asked, as Jesus often asked, if you were offered this kind of a deal in partnership, who wouldn't raise their hand and say, I want in on that deal? Well, that's the deal, the covenant that God offers us. God is all in. God is faithful. God is eternally renewed and tireless in his giving. And he offers us that kind of deal. Now, as often happened in Jesus' day, people didn't always respond to parables. Sometimes the disciples said, speak plainly to us. No more of these stories. So again, in the form of Jesus, let me then speak plainly. And let me offer specifically what I think are 4 resistances, 4, you might call them anxieties or fears that we have that prevent us from letting our life and our financial life be transformed fully by God's grace. So I'm going to be specific and plain. So the first one I would say is I'm a little hesitant about giving to the church or giving a little more to the church and to God's mission because I'm worried about that I won't have enough to meet my other obligations in my life. The mortgage, the rent, the bills, the health care, the insurance, and so on. And so I just gotta be careful about giving to the church. Now, let me just remind you that this isn't new for God's people. God's people have always been a little resistant about, what will happen if I give too much. And in fact, in the book of Malachi, when's the last time you were reading in the biblical book of Malachi? Yes, I thought so. In the book of Malachi, literally chapter 3, this is the exact conversation that's going on. People are kind of holding back on their giving to the temple. And God actually speaks directly to it. So, this is 3,000 years God's people have been hesitating. And here's Malachi 3:10. You can all look it up and read it. Here's what God says. God says, test me. Test me. And find that I will bless your giving. And I will literally open up the storehouses of heaven and bless you. Quote, unquote, God himself. Now, a couple of years ago, during one of our stewardship campaigns, a family came to me. And I knew that one of the members of the family had just lost their job because I was pastoring the family. And I anticipated they were going to come to me and say what I often hear when there's been an incident like that in a family's life. Father Andrew, we want to give more to the church, but we're really feeling under pressure and we've lost some of our income, so we're going to have to cut back. And I always say, of course, I understand that, and God does too. But that's not the conversation that I was given. The person said, we've decided we're going to increase our giving this year. And they did. And that was several years ago. Now, I'm not going to embellish the story and say they hit the lottery the next week or anything like that. That gets into what we maybe want versus our needs, that. But I can tell you, without naming this family, that family is stable and well and thriving now, years later. God was and is faithful. Okay, here's a second resistance. I am worried about giving because of retirement. The retirement's coming, we all know it. Those commercials remind us, whether we're going to have enough, and we're living longer, and I'm going to hold back a little bit because I need to make sure I plan for my retirement. And a corollary of this is I'm going to hesitate now, but when I get the promotion or make a little more money and I'm doing a little better, then I'll give. I'll make it up to you, God. And this is a resistance that we have. I want to tell you about the story of Jeff Eastberg. Some of you know the story, but it's worth being reminded of. Jeff was a member of our congregation who always attended the 8 o'clock service. He was an usher, and he'd always be posted by the chapel door greeting people. Very modest guy. He was a single guy, lived in a modest house in the neighborhood, and towards the end of his life, he came down with cancer. And I loved visiting Jeff in his home and bringing him communion. He was a cat lover, and he had about a dozen cats in his house, and he had all those cat jungles, you know what I'm talking about? The pet, I don't know what they're called, but he had them. And so it was fun going to Jeff's house. And Jeff died, and several months later, the church in the mail received a notice. Jeff left $1 million to the church to support our ministry in Haiti and our Family Promise ministry. Jeff was not worried about his retirement. He understood that giving is a way of living. And to this day, this year, literally almost $40,000, as it was in year past, have been given to support our ministry in Haiti and Family Promise, and it will continue in the years to come. Here's the third resistance. I'm not really sure where my money is going, and is it really making an impact? And sometimes charities, even churches, you can't quite know where the money's going. So I'm not sure about the impact. So I'm going to hold back a little bit. Now I hope you're enjoying as much as I'm enjoying helping to write these. That starting about 2 months ago, we putting in making a difference. It's a column we now have every week in your announcements. So when you don't want to look at the sermon, I'm going to give you all permission. You can look at that and read that story, because it's sometimes better than the sermon. And every week now the staff is saying, gosh, what's the story we want to tell this week? Let me briefly tell 2 stories that are among my favorites, and I've shared some of this already with others. About a month or so ago, someone came into the church office and was seriously thinking about committing suicide. Stranger off the street. Literally came in, and Father Ben and Gina Valley were there in the office. I think I was doing the new Eucharist or was out at a meeting. And he asked, and Father Ben dropped everything he was doing and went to speak with this guy. Gina got on the phone and found out what resources are available to respond to people in crisis. They were talking to him, praying with him. They arranged to have someone from a suicide prevention ministry in our community actually come to St. Gregory's to meet with this guy. Meanwhile, keeping him there in the office. And then arranged for this person to take him to a facility where he was going to get the help and the counseling and therapy that he needed. And his life was stabilized and it was saved. That's a life-giving difference. Another story. As you know, we have a number of homeless members who join into our life. Sometimes they join in our worship. Sometimes they wait for the various meals that we have. And many of you have seen them at breakfast or just in our courtyard around. And one of them who has become very involved in our church, and frankly challenged us, particularly the staff, because this person would sometimes go into the bathroom, because this is how he would get a shower, take the paper towels and do that, and the bathroom would always be left the way we all want it to be left. Sometimes he would want to help, but it actually created more problems than helping us. And it strained us as a congregation. And I kept trying to, as rector, talk to everyone who was getting strained by saying, hang in there, we're doing what God is calling us to do. This is what Jesus would have us do. Finally, it was arranged after literally years that he was accepted into a temporary sheltering program. And we were rejoicing. Just this past week, he calls me on the phone and says, they've now arranged for a permanent apartment for me. And I've got a kitchen and a bedroom, and I'm so excited he wanted to tell me all this. And he said, I'm going to start taking the bus to come to St. Gregory's because I don't want to forget my church family. That's making a difference. Never doubt about the impact of our giving. Third, or what am I up to? Fourth, resistance. Maybe my gift is just too small. Maybe I can't give enough, and then, I'm going to feel embarrassed because it's too small. So, I'm just not ready to give. I thought about this one, and I have to give out a shout out to my wife. She said, Andrew, you need a visual on this one. So here's the visual. It's baptism Sunday, so we got water. $5 will buy pencils for a classroom in Haiti, going down to Haiti this week. The little sack of groceries, a peanut butter jar and tuna fish that many of you bring, are now regularly feeding 20, 30 people every week who come into our office. Some of you have given just small checks to Episcopal Charities. It's Episcopal Charity Sunday. Last year, 60,000 pounds of food were given out to over 20 feeding ministries throughout South Florida, including some of our own feeding ministries. Last year, we conducted 900 plus worship services, private services, public worship Eucharist, morning prayers, evening prayers, compline, private communions, Holy Week worship, over 900 small pieces of worship. Drop by drop, Jesus transforms us and our world. At the end of today's gospel, Jesus says, "Let the children come to me." And he takes them in his arms, he lays hands on them, and he blesses them, as we will in a moment with Andrew Mark Thompson. We're all children of God, you and I. And today and every Sunday, Jesus is taking us into his arms. And he's laying hands on us, and he's blessing us. And he's blessing and transforming all of our lives. Indeed, even our financial lives. And he's making life happen. Healing and transformation in community and in our hearts. This is what the gospel is all about. And this is our mission. I pray that you'll respond to that amazing grace that is with us, transforming hearts and community and our financial lives through Jesus' love. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.